When we think about ancient Egypt, we often imagine the towering pyramids, mummies, and the legendary pharaohs like Tutankhamun. What we don't often consider, however, is how sex played an important role in the culture, religion, and daily life of this ancient civilization. Sex in ancient Egypt was not just a private matter. It was deeply tied to religion, mythology, and the daily life of the people. The ancient Egyptians had a unique view of sex, one that was often more open than many cultures throughout history. In about 10 minutes, you're going to fully discover how sex played a role in their religious rituals, societal norms, and even their magical practices. So, let's dig deeper into 10 facts about sex in ancient Egypt that probably weren't covered in your history class. 10. The beginning of creation was by masturbation. The Egyptians had a unique creation myth involving the god Atum, who is said to have created himself. According to Egyptian mythology, Atum had no partner. In order to create the first gods, Shu and Tefnut, he masturbated. This act of self-creation was symbolic of the fertile and life-giving forces of the universe. In fact, masturbation in Egyptian culture was not just a private act, but an important religious ceremony. Atum's self-creation tied into broader fertility rituals associated with the Nile River. The river's annual flooding, essential for crop growth, was thought to be connected to the orgasmic energy of Atum's creative act. It's a striking example of how the Egyptians linked sex and creation to agricultural abundance. In time, the concept of the god's hand became associated with female fertility, which was a significant cultural symbol, especially in later dynasties. 9. A god with a permanently erect phallus. One of Egypt's most prominent fertility gods, Min, is often depicted with a permanently erect phallus. Min was the god of male sexual potency, and his image could be found throughout Egypt in temples and shrines. Men who were struggling with impotence would often make offerings to Min, including small figurines of his phallus, hoping to gain his blessing. In fact, Egyptian lettuce was believed to have aphrodisiac properties, primarily because of the white, milky sap it emitted, which was reminiscent of semen. The association of Min with this plant was part of fertility rituals that had deep ties to Egyptian beliefs about sexuality. To this day, some believe that rubbing the phallus of Min in temples may still offer fertility blessings. 8. Adultery was punishable by death. Like many ancient societies, Egypt had strict laws surrounding marriage and fidelity. Adultery was a serious offense, and in some cases it was punishable by death. One particularly notorious case involved a chief workman named Paneb, who worked in the tomb-building village of Deir el-Medina. Paneb was known for his criminal behavior, including theft and corruption, but he was also accused of committing adultery. His actions became widely known because he had illicit relations with married women, even causing his son to join in the scandal. According to Egyptian legal texts, if caught, such a crime could lead to a death sentence. The harsh penalties show just how seriously the ancient Egyptians viewed the sanctity of marriage and sexual relations. 7. Sensuous songs celebrated the female form. The ancient Egyptians had a rich tradition of love songs, much like those in other cultures. These songs often described the beauty and allure of women in poetic detail. One example, from a text called The Song of the Harpist, describes a woman as having a neck as upright as a gazelle's, fingers like lotus buds, and thighs that moved with grace. The poetic language used in these songs reveals much about the ancient Egyptians' appreciation for both the beauty of the human form and the act of love itself. These Egyptian poems celebrated sensuality and desire, offering a window into how Egyptians viewed intimacy and beauty. 6. Egyptians had their own version of adult films. Before the internet and adult magazines, the ancient Egyptians had their own form of erotic art, most famously preserved in the Turin Erotic Papyrus. This papyrus, dating to around 1150 BCE, shows explicit depictions of sexual acts, many of them quite graphic. The papyrus presents images of a chubby, balding man engaged in sexual activities with a beautiful woman, depicted in many unusual positions. Though the purpose of the papyrus is still debated, some scholars think it was created as a satirical political statement. Its explicit nature reveals that ancient Egyptians had a less than puritanical view of sexuality. The papyrus is one of the earliest forms of visual adult content that we know of, indicating how deeply intertwined sex was with art, culture, and everyday life. 5. The Tale of the Two Brothers, a seductive woman and a dark twist. Sexual temptation also appears in Egyptian literature, notably in the myth, The Tale of the Two Brothers. This story tells of a woman who attempts to seduce her brother-in-law, Bata, after he is sent to fetch grain for his elder brother Anpu. When Bata refuses her advances, the woman falsely accuses him of attempting to seduce her. In a dramatic and gruesome twist, Anpu kills his wife and then proves his innocence by cutting off his own genitals and throwing them into the river, where fish promptly consume them. This tragic tale is one of many that showcase the complex relationship Egyptians had with sex, power, and deception. It also reflects the high value placed on virginity and fidelity within Egyptian society. 4. Homosexuality. Evidence is limited but intriguing. While evidence for homosexuality in ancient Egypt is somewhat limited, there are intriguing examples in the archaeological record. One of the most famous is the tomb of Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep, two men from the 5th dynasty who are depicted holding hands and rubbing noses. The act of rubbing noses was a typical display of affection in Egyptian art, often seen between married couples. While it's unclear whether the two men had a romantic or sexual relationship, their joint tomb suggests a close, possibly intimate bond. There's also a controversial passage in the myth of Horus and Seth, in which Horus tricks Seth after he attempts to rape him. These stories reveal that same-sex relationships may have existed, but the evidence remains ambiguous, making it a fascinating but debated aspect of Egyptian culture. 3. Sexual insults were common in ancient Egyptian culture. In ancient Egypt, insults were often laced with sexual references. People used sexual language in their verbal sparring, and curses were frequently sexual in nature. One infamous example comes from a letter written by a workman in the Valley of the Kings, who curses his colleague with lines like, "May you copulate with a donkey." Such language, though vulgar, highlights how sex and sexuality were intertwined with the social and political dynamics of the time. These kinds of insults were not just meant to shame or degrade, they were often used as a form of social control or as a way to undermine someone's power. The sexual nature of these insults speaks to how central the concept of virility and sexual prowess was in ancient Egyptian identity. 2. Impotence was a common concern. Impotence was an issue in ancient Egypt, just as it is today. Egyptians attributed impotence to both physical and psychological causes. They had various remedies for the condition, including magical spells and herbal treatments. For instance, the wisdom text, The Maxims of Ptahhotep, contains advice that a man's inability to have children may stem from being too shy or nervous around his wife. Ancient Egyptian magic often involved rituals or objects aimed at enhancing sexual potency. Rituals performed by priests or magicians could help restore sexual health, especially for those who had been cursed by rivals. These spells often involved knotting strings or using fish imagery, as seen in the Tale of the Two Brothers, where a fish consumed the severed genitals as part of a magical curse. 1. Magic to attract the opposite sex. Magic was a significant part of ancient Egyptian life, and this extended to matters of the heart. To attract a lover, Egyptians would use figurines or spells to influence their desired partner's feelings. For example, a man might commission a magician to make a voodoo doll of a woman he desired, hoping to cast a spell that would ensure she remained loyal to him and him alone. The doll would be inscribed with a magical spell and often pierced with bronze nails to enhance the power of the spell. This practice shows how deeply intertwined love, sex, and magic were in Egyptian life. The belief in magical forces was so strong that even the most intimate relationships were viewed as being subject to mystical influences.